Okay, let's take a look at this one. This is 1714, the case of the Catalans. The company that produces it is Devere, but it was released, at least that I picked up, through GMT. Now that caused some weird things. I never would have probably heard of it. And look, it looks kind of Euro-ish. It's got cubes and everything. Yeah, just hold on. I probably wouldn't have heard of it if it wasn't a GMT game. It didn't get a lot of buzz. GMT put it out in some announcements. People were interested in it. A couple people probably noticed it because it was GMT, but a little bit more buzz. And then it kind of fell off the radar. It had me intrigued at that point, but I'm slow moving on making my decisions at this point in my life. Unless this was absolutely something I felt I had to have at the moment. There was no way I was going to put it in order with GMT. I thought it was normal pre-order or whatever. I had no idea. Then a recent email comes from GMT saying, yeah, well, all our orders, have shipped out that we had pre-ordered and that could cover, our handling of it. And we have a few more left for sale, but just a few. So if you're interested, you better hurry up. And I looked at it again and I said, why the hell didn't I pre-order this? Well, the reason I didn't is because it is somewhat Euro-ish looking, isn't it? With all those cubes and stuff. But you know what? After the coin series, which, although it didn't really hit on all cylinders for me, this looked intriguing enough by the description. But then I read, well, it's got like what? It's got an 8-page rule book. Uh-oh, that's nothing. That's okay. They didn't do the rules very well, so they managed to get a lot of them in there without actually writing them. Overall, that's a goal you want to do, right? But in this case, they kind of hid. And the fact that the rules kind of had illustrations and stuff in them meant that this was not, it was very clear. I glanced at them, I think, before I made my first choice on it. It was very clear that this was not going to be even at the level of, say, your standard S&T magazine game, probably, in terms of amount of rules. Well, I think there actually is an amount in there. So what do we got here? Well, it's a game about, it's set in the War of Spanish Succession, which, right away, ding, why am I not buying it right there, right? Well, in part because I was already a little disappointed in my own expectations, even though it's a fairly good game, and as a decent simulation, with No Peace Without Spain. That just didn't do it for me, and I was worried that this would be the same. And we don't know yet. I haven't finished playing it. I haven't started playing it. But I'm really, really excited about this. The players are the allies. The French are handled by non-player mechanisms, which I'm not terribly familiar with, but will be baked into the cards, I bet. The game itself is sort of a CDG, but you don't hold your cards in your hand. Here are the kind of cards we have here. Now, instead, each turn they're going to be spread out, and you take kind of an action roll selection on the cards that are available. So we're seeing, some very well-used mechanisms. Sorry, my plug is not working. There we go. Let's get the zoom back out. I can't use the damn zoom. I should just tape it down. You see this combination of the action selection Euro type mechanism with the CDG style cards that are going to give you an option. We don't have any. Well, here's one. They give you an option between basically points you can spend and an event you can trigger. And look at more. The event that you trigger costs you the cost of the card. There was another game that did that I looked at recently. I really like that mechanism because it says, hey, if you want to do the event on the card, it's going to be equal in value to the resources you can obtain by not doing it, which makes sense. But it's actually kind of more powerful, and you have to pay those resources because that's the cost of generating that event. And most games don't allow you to track. Maybe it was Lincoln's War. I don't remember. Something not so long ago had that. You can bank points, or you spend the points on the card. So this is like a mishmash of different mechanisms. You've got little wooden cubes, but you've got a hex map. I've not seen that before, I don't think. I'm used to cubes being on kind of an area map. You know, an area map doesn't make something not a war game. A hex map doesn't make something a war game, although this may be kind of bending the issue. You've got this cool little wall that you get to pull down during play. Okay. Another aspect of it is each player country has their own specific set of victory conditions. Okay, no biggie. On cards, which they randomize and get 3 of. These are going to these are the specialized, goals for the game. And then you have a fairly large amount of them that other people aren't going to know what your actual goals are. They know the set that you come from. And this kind of reminds me of, going back, way back, A Mighty Fortress, which I've never actually played, and I really got to get on the table at some point for you guys. Where you have this kind of secret, there I think you actually pick them, but here you get them at random, and now you have to try to guide your play through those. You're allowed to negotiate about more in this game than any other game that I think I've seen, according to how the rules handle it. You can exchange player turn order, you can exchange this, that, and the other. Very, very loose and powerful negotiation rules. The actual victory points are going to be generated through these concession cards, some of them, and some of these fit some of the players' goals, and those are also going to be kind of a random deck that gets spread out through here when they're triggered. There is something a little strange about it, but we'll get to that in a moment. All right, let's talk a little bit about how the game actually works. Okay. The spaces on the board, victory point spaces, are labeled in red, and they have the amount of victory points they're worth on them. Starting setup is noted on the board with cubes that player has to place there. But not everything's player, some of it's non-player controlled. Got little anchors to indicate map, naval ports. The ports are distinguished between Atlantic ports, which have a darker anchor, and Mediterranean ports, which have a lighter one. The Mediterranean won't be available early in the game. You've got a track running around the board, which is where you're going to track your money and resources and such not. You've got a national will, which affects your actions that you can take. It's a very simplified one. We're not talking about something like La Grande Guerre here, but a lot of different little pieces here. These are just places to keep your extra troops, your reserves. These discs are going to be used for recording actions. You'll be putting them on the cards you pick, as well as over there if you take an action with it. This is the turn order marker. Everybody's turns will be ordered on there. Again, that's negotiable. Okay. And the rules are very, very dense for what they look like. And it took a little bit of thinking to kind of digest them. They don't spoon feed it the way the old Avalon Hill, well, the old SPI ones do. Nor the way GMT tries to. Okay. So, you've got a fairly short sequence of play here, just running down here. The first thing you do is you place cards. You draw a number of cards equal to the number of players. And the game is basically a 5-player game for the 5 different allies. There are rules to handle leaving some players out. Eventually down to 2 players, each player is taking 2 powers. I would strongly suggest, look, you know, unless you can never get 5 people together, aim for 5. That kind of fiddling doesn't really work well. You won't get the same kind of game. Okay, so you deal out a number of cards equal to the number of players over here down the side. I think you start up at the top. The order is important. If there is any treaty, the blue turn marker should be placed on the first French reserve mark box with troops. These will have a phase E. So, that's what this is used for. I think it's if there's a card that says treaty on it, that's going to trigger troops from there to be released. At the beginning of the game, the French have, well, the Bourbon, because the Spaniards too, have a certain amount of troops on the board, but they have 3 pulses of reinforcements that come in that determine the era of the game. Okay. Then each player in their turn order chooses one of the cards, and they slap one of their discs down on top of the card that they want to use. And, well, I could unshuffle those, but whatever. After that, in order of the cards from top to bottom, the players take their turns, and they're going to have an option of either, like I said, paying to activate the card's event, or taking a single action over here and gaining the points that the card gives you. If the cards have a 0 value, you must do the event on them, but you also get the option to do an action as well as that. So those are kind of probably the last person to pick, unless they give you a positional advantage, and we'll see about that. Now, if you do an action, you mark it over here, and it's unique role selection there as well. No one else can take the same action that you took. But on the next turn, these are going to have slid over here, and you won't be allowed to take that action on the next turn. If there's the blue turn marker over here, then the Bourbons are going to recruit based on the highest value of will to fight. And I think that just means they get a number of troops equal to whoever has the highest will. If all players are not at war, no recruitment takes place. And the troops will be recruited following player turn sequence. The French will be the allied players, the actual players of the game, will be placing the French in legal places to put them. No French troop from a specific period can be recruited until all the troops from a previous period have been recruited. From each French reserve box, the troop highlighted in red must be recruited first, which is going to cause, that'll be this, you can see there's a little red circle around this unit. That'll cause a concessions phase. And that happens at the end of the turn. The following happens. You add the cards from that war period to the draw pile and shuffle the pile together with the discards to produce a new draw deck. In the mid and late war. You don't do that with the early war. You're already in the early war at the beginning of the game. And then 5 cards are dealt out from the concession deck across here. Now here's what's weird. The concession deck is color-coded early, medium, the color in the shield, and late war. But there's only 5 of each. I think these may be the historical concession dates. The rules say shuffle them all together, and I think that's probably wise. There are a couple of concessions buried into here, which you can essentially take by activating their event with your turn action. I think they're all, no, some of them have actual victory points on them. Some concessions have no victory points on them, but they do trigger an event with them. Now, we have different kinds of cards here. We have events, which just cause a certain thing to happen. We have characters who should also be read. There's a treaty. I don't see a character in here. There's a couple of treaties here. They're played like events, but they activate a phase of Bourbon reinforcements when the current round is finished, which could, of course, trigger you into a new stage of the war with new concessions there. Battles. So what does this say? This says, Bourbon victory. All players with troops in the Crown of Castile or the Crown of Aragon decrease by 2 levels their will to fight. So if you've got troops in this area, you're going to be penalized by that card. Just issues like that come up. Now obviously, I'm going to be playing for the first time and not used to the cards. They are cataloged in the historical notes booklet, which unfortunately isn't really that much about notes and is more, there's historical notes on a per card basis, but there's not really much in terms of I read the design notes and I don't remember them. Just before I went to sleep. There's not really much in there's no, discussion of the overall events in a timeline or anything like that. You're going to have to look elsewhere for that. And that's kind of disappointing to me. I saw that big historical notes booklet and I thought, ooh, yay! I'm going to see sort of a primer to, or primer if you'd rather, to the War of Spanish Succession. And I would have really kind of liked that, even though I know a good deal about it on that higher level. I do like to refresh myself before I start playing a game, and I was kind of looking forward to it. But it's just notes on each individual card, which to me is, I don't know, just not interesting to read. Maybe I'll read it as the cards come up, or read some of them as the cards come up, but some of them I know. And yeah, and then some of these have concessions in them. I think those are obviously not in this deck. And what those allow you to do, like I said, is if you take them, you now have the victory points from those concessions in your hand. Alright, we got anything else we want to talk about here? Cards have certain symbols on them, which indicate the elimination of units. This is going to, the red and the green are going to affect the number of ramparts here, which is an end condition. This little symbol just says this is part of the concession deck in and of itself. And the blue marker is activated by certain cards. Okay. So, when you actually, you know what? When you actually do a concessions event, you shuffle the pile. 5 of them are placed on the board on the normal turn order location. And then in decreasing order of the will to fight, each player chooses a concession and they put their turn marker on it, just like they're picking their actions. If 2 or more people are at the same level, essentially the priority goes to whoever has the more occupied Bourbon spaces. And Bourbon spaces, I believe, are not just blue, but also the Castilian, which includes the Walloon territories. And then next tiebreaker will be the turn sequence. You can't use Eugene of Savoy to change concessions orders. And now you're allowed during negotiation to change the position of the markers using the text of the concessions and any other resources you may have, including future agreements that you're not bound to. So you can look at your concession that you've got and say, look, I'll change the triggering order of these concessions if you change, or if you use your concession against the Portuguese because they're pissing me off and yours has a power that you can use against them. That's the kind of negotiation that you can make here, and it's binding as long as it's within the same phase. It's not binding if any agreement that goes outside the current phase is no longer binding. And that's kind of an interesting take. That's often the take that players sort of automatically consider that deal making should be, you know, like, well, I'll give you $20 if you do this. Well, I always kind of look at it as there's almost always a time lag between events. So you hand me the $20 and I didn't do it, or I do it and you don't hand me the $20, right? But here you're allowed to, or you must actually conform to the deal within the same phase. Okay, so then as you activate the concessions, you take them and put them by your stash on the board. And they're going to be your victory points, and they may actually also trigger the event at a later stage. None of this is terribly clearly written. When the players draw the concessions, they place the turn markers on the last available box. So what I think happens is the turn markers get cleared out, and the concessions are going to generate a new turn order. Okay. Now we hit here. Games with 2, 3, or 4. Okay. So if there's not enough players, concessions then get auctioned off for resources with restrictions. You can never go below -10 resources, but you can go negative. They'll serve as a victory point penalty, and a very expensive one, because resources aren't really worth anything at the end of the game. But if you're below 0, you pay 1 victory point for each resource you're below 0. Okay, for the action phase, when you execute an action, you place your action marker of your color on the box of that action. We've already kind of talked about this, but let's talk about what they actually do. So the first one is attack up there. That'll eliminate a Bourbon troop adjacent to one of your troops. Okay, now, to an Imperial troop, or to a Crown of Aragon troop. I think what that is meant to express is that you can eliminate a Bourbon, Imperial, or Crown of Aragon. Oh no, this is Crown of Aragon. Yeah, I think what it is you convert them into the other type of troop. Now that seems a little weird. No. It's the adjacency that the two refers. Yeah, this was translated by someone who's not terribly comfortable with English, but, you know. So it eliminates a Bourbon troop adjacent to either one of your troops, an Imperial troop, it wouldn't need the 2 there, or a troop of the Crown of Aragon. Okay. So these are your allies, Crown of Aragon and Imperial, along with the players in the game itself. And this is going to be based on the cost, is going to be based on the will factor of the player. It costs between 1 and 3, and that cost is listed in the attack and recruit box at the 3 different levels of will. Okay, recruit. This is also, so these things that are listed as warfare actions, you can't do if you're not at war, for example, if you're there. But you also, not all players start at war, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I haven't found the rules for that here. I found a note about it elsewhere in the designer's notes, so we may have to figure that out from the designer's notes, because I don't think it's in the rules, or at least not that I can see. Okay, so recruit is going to be you take troops from your country in a home space or a space that contains your troops. Great Britain will use the Dutch Republic as its home, and it's mixed in there already. That's where they ship their troops all along. Until Joseph I's death is played, anyone can recruit imperial troops in the imperial home spaces or in spaces that contain imperial troops. And the cost is going to be based on your will of the country, again, 1 to 3. You can move. You can move terrestrial or extraterrestrial. Oh, they got maritime. You can move your troops or a troop of the Crown of Aragon to an adjacent space that has no enemies in it, doing terrestrial. Maritime, you move one of your troops or a troop of the Crown of Aragon from the current port to a port without enemies. It doesn't look like you can move imperial troops, and you can't move your other allies. These movements can be combined from the same troop. Now, it seems to be 1 cube is affected here. Everyone's allowed to move imperial troops until the death of Joseph I. Okay, so you can move imperials. During the early war, maritime movement can only happen between 2 Atlantic ports. You're not allowed to go into the Mediterranean and do maritime movement. And I'm not quite sure what... Oh, because the French control the Med at that point. Yeah. I'm saying, I don't understand why both players can't, but no, it's we're all allied. We can't. Okay. So yeah, the French-Spanish Navy had the Med pretty blocked down. Terrestrial movement's going to cost you a resource for each space and troop moved. And it sounds to me like you can move as many units as you like. It really does. And maritime is 2 between ports in the same zone, but 3 if you cross from an Atlantic to a Med port, or vice versa. You can do a resource action, in which case you give 5 resources and 2 additional resources for each Bourbon space that your troops occupy. Doesn't have to be victory point or anything. Or you can increase your will to fight. You pay resources equal to the value of each level risen. So I think if you're here, you'd pay 4 for the next one, 5, 5, just the number on there, which has very little, which has no other real effect. It's just the cost. Shit. There goes the zoom. Yeah. We had a disaster on California Gold where the entire review part is unwatchable. You can listen to me. I had to make a decision. Did I want to, reshoot it where I would probably not be anywhere near as correct in terms of giving my discussion, or did could we do without visual? And my reviews don't need visual. Okay, so you can do this several times as well, but you can never drop your debt below -10, the same as normal. You can always negotiate how you're going to use your cards. The sequence of execution of the card's text, that's always up to the player who's playing it. Which player is affected, or play the card as whether you're going to use the text or the value. That negotiation can be, and it can include an exchange and sale of concessions that you already have in your hand or whatever. Characters, who apparently, I guess, give you bonuses and you hold in reserve. Or transfer of resources among players and agreements in relation to future rounds. The goals, though, these cards that you start with 3 of these. Those have to remain secret. You cannot exchange them. Yeah, that would be pretty big if you could. And anything else here? Okay, and the agreements that refer to the current round must be satisfied. Future rounds are not binding. Okay, the game ends when Barcelona falls. That'll immediately end the turn, the game and the turn. The active player can't carry out any other action. Each player gets victory points, 1 for each victory point space occupied. Double the points if the space is a secret goal for the player. And most victory point spaces are just in red here. Certain ones are spelled out as for 2 each in the Crown of Aragon, and 1 and 3, Barcelona itself. Madrid's 5. They're written on the map, actually. 10 in Paris. It's all on the map. This was a little confusingly written, so I thought, well, Crown of Aragon 2 for... Is this only for the player who's playing Crown of Aragon? There isn't a player. What's up? Okay. You get negative victory points potentially from the 13th clause of the Treaty of Utrecht, which basically abandons the Catalans and the entire Aragon crown. You get negative victory points if you have negative resources. That's one way the game can end. The game could also end if the Bourbons are knocked down to 20 troops or less on the map once you've reached late war. And that's spelled out here. It's hard for me to deal with because I'm on a tether. You know what? Screw it. Nah, we didn't charge at all. I thought all that time being on there would charge. Well, I may have to plug in again. In that case, the victory points are the same, except you can get 5 victory points for the concession of the Pact of Genoa, and 7 victory points if you're Austria and the death of Joseph I has been played. And it's kind of an evening thing because Austria is going to pretty much pull out of the war during that. After that. And then you get negative victory points as to the resources. So the big difference is, how does the game end? Does the game end in a kind of a draw with the fall of Barcelona and Spain becoming a Bourbon territory? Or, well, Philip, right? I think. Or does it end with the Bourbons utterly crushed and unable to continue? In which case you've saved the Catalans and there's special circumstances of Aragon as well, I guess. And that'll give you the extra bonus points for the Pact of Genoa, and, Austria, the Habsburgs probably keep Spain in their own hands as well, which is why the Austrians get a bonus for that. And those have nothing to do with any special cards here. Those are just bonuses that go. They give rules for splitting it up among players. Now, let's look at this player notes, or designer notes, because there's something weird in here. The game starts when Portugal and Savoy had not yet joined the Grand Alliance in the game. There is no war front in the initial position of both nations. Yeah, they have no pieces. Savoy is not far. But I mean, it's not like this, right? This basically gives them an easier position when they start the game. Siege of Turin and Vigo Bay recruit troops for Savoy and Portugal and represent the entry of these nations into the country. I think that's just a discussion point. That the truth of the matter is they can get entered into the war earlier if someone wants to. That someone wants to is a hard job, though, because they would have to do it themselves without their troops, or someone would have to use the French through cards somehow, and we don't know how those cards actually work. So I suppose that's about it. And the designer, I guess, is a Catalan, hence the focus and importance of the Catalans on both the title of the game as well as as well as perhaps the victory conditions. That probably didn't matter. They didn't matter too much to most of the Allies. The English did feel some regret that they expressed, but you know, when it comes down to it, nation states in that time especially probably don't give two shits about the people losing some rights. Anyway, let's well, I'll give this a shot. I'm gonna start by dealing those suckers out, but let's send this up, give you an idea what the game looks like.